Alright, so in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to upgrade my electrical panel up to 200 amps. Right now it's at 100 amps, but at the same time I also need to move my service. My service is outside and it is not in the proper location for a construction project that we're going to be hopefully doing soon, starting in the spring. Okay, it being the winter of 2021. All right. Now, when you start to do this, the first thing you have to figure out is where is your new service going to come in? And there's a lot of factors that play into this, and it's something you really need to give a lot of thought to. So let me show you how the solution that I came up with, and you'll be able to see that this whole area is just a nightmare for running electrical. So you can see that the electrical panel is right next to a door and right under a beam, and it has a number of pieces of conduit and the runs coming into it. I want to keep the electrical box as close to where it is as possible. I may be able to move it up. If I had to, I can move it down, but preferably, ideally I'd keep it pretty close to where it is so I don't have to rerun everything. Now, strangely enough, when the door opens, it swings up and it actually hits the beam, so it doesn't interfere with the electrical box. But the meter is right on the other side of this. And so the meter is now going to be, if you follow me up around here, it is going to be running down over, let that adjust, over to this area right over here. All right, and so it's a bit of a nightmare figuring out where I'm going to poke through the hole on this, but I think I have it mapped out and I'll kind of show you this. You can see, unfortunately, it's right above the water heater, and it's where the electrical panel used to be, God only knows how many years ago. So, yeah, this is basically what we're going to do here, and I'll start walking you through all the steps, and I'll even show you outside what's going on out there, and show you where the electrical meter is now, where it's buried, and why I want to move it. All right. Okay, so here's the service running into the house. You can see it's a bit of a mess up there. I'm not sure if you can see this, but there's actually 2 splices for every wire. At some point somebody upgraded. And basically I'm going to move this over to the corner here. And if you track this down, my meter is actually underneath the deck. So all that needs to be removed, taken out. Some people would say this is cheating, but the math on figuring out where to put this hole precisely where I want it, because everything's so tight, was well beyond me, especially with I don't know how thick the stucco is and things like that, so on 100-year-old stucco. So I went ahead and poked the hole through. Now usually you don't do this because you can see it bursts out on the side, but I was really careful when I was drilling through, so now I know exactly where to put my hole. And so when I do that, then from there I can figure out everywhere else where my meter's gonna go and everything like that. So once you know that and you can get that through there, things get a lot easier. Now I'm starting to drill through the stucco with a carbide bit that was sized out properly for the connections that I'm going to be making. I wanted to be verify that a couple of times just to make sure you don't want to drill the wrong size hole with these very hard. Now to save the blade, once I kind of got through the stucco a little bit, I came in there with a chisel that I had laying around and I chipped away at the stucco. This makes a huge difference in saving the bit because you want to get to the wood as quick as possible. You can see here that now that I chipped this away, this is going to save my blade a ton. So all I did was scar it out and then chisel it away. It worked out great. Alright, so now that I've gotten through the stucco, now it's time to start drilling through this. This takes a lot of work with the hammer drill. You just have to really just be patient with it and really know that it's going to take some time and a lot of effort. And you really want to be careful that this thing doesn't lock up on you and whack you in the face, just like that right there. I wasn't paying attention for a quick second and I restarted over. They call these wrist busters for a reason when they get stuck in there. There is no torque control on this. Something's going to spin, either the blade or the drill itself. So, lesson learned. But anyway, we got through it. Pretty awesome. After a little bit of hard work, I am through. This is perfect. So, I will now be able to get I'll be able to get my electrical out here so I can join that in with my panel. Now, once you know where the box is going to go, before you mount it, I highly recommend you go ahead and install your ground rod, because in this case, because I'm going directly below this, and this is in somewhat of a main thoroughfare, I want the ground rod can't extend outside of the house too much because it would be a trip hazard. So I measured it from the box to figure out where it needs to go, and then I dropped it down, and I'm going to go ahead and drill through the concrete. Now you saw there I started off with a smaller drill just to kind of put an indent into the concrete where I wanted to go. Then after that, I went ahead and got the hammer drill. This is going to take some time and a little bit of effort when you're going through a sidewalk like this. Again, not ideal to be this close to the house, but I'm positioning it to where it's going to be very hard for someone to trip over this as they walk by, which is really the point. Now, you want to make the hole a little bit bigger. This is a 5/8 ground rod, and so I only had a 5/8 bit, so I put a 5/8 bit in there, and then I helped to just bore it out as I went through there. And you'll know when you get through because it just pops right through just like that. So before you start nailing in the ground rod, you need to put this connector on here, because as you pound that down, you're going to flatten out the top and you might not be able to get this on there. So make sure you get this on there and hand tighten it. That's actually pretty important. So once that's on there, it's time to start pounding it in. Now you can do this with a sledgehammer. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I got pretty lucky that I was able to get one of these ground rod smashers that are actually meant for putting this in there, and this will get you really, really close. Now this takes a lot of effort, and so definitely want to leave this for the apprentices. Now once you get so far, you'd have to use a sledgehammer would be better, but a neighbor borrowed mine, didn't get it back in time, and so I just went ahead and used the next closest thing I had in my house to get this to the level that I wanted it. Alright, so I got to be pretty careful when I knock these out, so I want to make sure that I don't go too far here. It's always easier to remove an extra one than pull out a... Alright, so there's a lot of different methods, at least a couple different methods for pulling these out. And if you're going to do this for a living, if you're doing this for a living, you already have your best method of doing it, or you'll develop it over time. This is the method that I use. It works out pretty well. And then once I have the hole, I'm going to come here and line this up so I can make marks on the stucco where I can pre-drill my holes. All right, I don't want to rely just on the stucco to hold the box out. I want to go through the stucco into the wood behind it, and that's going to help to make sure this thing can be up here hopefully for 100 years. All right, now I will tell you, and I think I mentioned this later in the video, getting anything level on stucco is always a bit of a challenge because of the uneven surfaces. So I just am patient and I accept a level of error. Later on you'll see that I actually got pretty lucky and it was dead on. But here I'm just coming through, mounting the box on the hole, coming in with the Sharpie and marking it, and then verifying that my box was actually level. Then what I did here was I went ahead and drilled through the stucco to get into the wood, and then from there I went ahead and drilled pilot holes for the lag bolts that I used. I think I used 2.5 inch or 3 inch lag bolts on these because of the stucco. And to make sure that water never gets in the house, before I put the lag bolts up, I went ahead and put caulk in all of the holes that I was going to put a lag bolt into. So there's a lot of different ways to get the electricity into the house from the meter box. I'm going to use, I think what's most common where I live in the Chicagoland area, I'm going to use some rigid, IMC rigid, aluminum, whatever's allowed in your area. I'm going to use this, and I'm just going to basically run this through the wall, and then, and I'll show you this a little bit. Then I'll put 2 of these on there and sandwich the back of the meter in place here, okay, between 2 of these. So I'll show you that here in a little bit. But before I run this through the wall, I want to do a couple of things. One, I'm going to go ahead and put a coupler in here. So this is all 2 inch. So I'm going to tighten this down, okay, as much as it will go. And then I'll actually grab a pipe wrench and a large set of plumb pliers, and I'm just going to tighten this down real fast. okay? All right, so I know it might be hard to see, but now this is on. Then what I want to do, this is how I'm going to convert from my rigid over to my EMT, 2-inch EMT, and I'll just tighten this up there. Now, some people will ask, and I see this on forums sometimes, shouldn't you put pipe dope on there or Teflon tape? And the answer to that is no, because that will affect the grounding path or the bonding path through this. So I'll go ahead and tighten this up. I'll even give this just a little bit of a turn to lock it into place. Give that a little bit of a turn. Now it's going to be time to go downstairs and pop this thing through. So now you can see this is a pretty busy area, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this little pipe, this little pipe that I've created, go ahead and push it out through the hole, all right, and then make sure I can get to the set screws in there. And this thing will actually get set back out a little bit. But for right now, that thing's going to be perfect because I'll be able to get in there and tighten down the EMT whenever I'm ready. And that'll allow me to position around this pipe, which is exactly what I need to do. All right. So as you can see, the pipe's now coming through. And I'll just go ahead, tighten this in there. Okay. And this will get it to the right length that I want it. It'll actually pull that in just a little bit. So the back of the box will come into here. And then this whole thing will get tightened up and pinched together, and it's going to work out really, really well. So a couple things I do to keep the water out is I'm going to caulk around here, and then I'm going to caulk on the back of the panel, and this will help to keep the critters out, and then I'll spray foam it from the back. Now around where this hole is, I'll also go ahead and make a bead of caulk around here for a little extra layer of protection. And because this isn't going on a flat surface, it's going on stucco, I gotta lay it on just a little bit thick. Now some people would let this dry, but since this is my house and I know how long it's gonna be there, I'm actually not too worried about that part of it. All right, so now it's time to install. I got 3-inch screws. There's enough wood in here that when I go through the stucco, which I've already pre-drilled, into this wood, it'll be just a perfect depth. So I'm pretty excited about that. So I have 2 of these, and I already have an extra drill ready to go. Okay. All right, so when you're putting this up, it can actually sit on that pipe, and that'll actually help you to take a little bit of the weight off, because these things, especially when there is a breaker in there, they can be a little heavy. And so what I do when I drill these in, I don't tighten them in all the way because I want to get this thing level for when the pipe that extends up to the overhead I want that to be able to pop in there at level as well. So I put all 4 in, and then I come in at the very end and tighten them all the way down. Okay, so now that this is popping through, we need to sandwich the back plate together, and we're going to tighten this up. We'll do this by using 2 little lock nuts here. The nearest screwdriver. Tighten that up. All right, that'll be there forever. And then, now the important thing about this is you need to get this all the way in. So you have to have enough threads here for it to be deep enough. Tighten this in. This completely covers this up, and so when you run your wire through there, it won't hit any metal at all. All right. So one of the last things we always want to make sure is how level it is, and on a stucco house, it is almost impossible to get this dead on. So I'm really pleased with how this turned out. It's very hard to do that, and it's very important to get this level. Because as we begin to run the conduit up, the EMT up, it's going to make making that straight line lined up 1,000 times easier. So that's very cool. All right, and I go ahead and run a pretty thick bead of caulk right across the top of there where it matches up with the house itself, just to make sure no water pops through. All right, this service meter is installed, and well, the box is mounted, and we'll start working from the inside. All right, so now what I'm doing is using two 22-degree, 2-inch EMT offsets, or bends. And the cool thing about this was I could actually use these to offset around that vent pipe that's there. And that worked out great because it offset the EMT perfectly. And I don't have access to a 2-inch conduit bender. So I was lucky that I have a buddy who owns Linear Solutions who helped me get this equipment from him. And if you are a electrical distribution place, I can highly recommend Linear Solutions out in Maryville, Indiana. Pat Fay is awesome. He also helped hook me up with this 90-degree bend here, which was pre-made. Again, I'm not going to have a 2-inch conduit bend, and for the amount of time it would have taken to rent one, all of that, it's much better to get them pre-made and then just put couplers in there to attach everything. Some people like the compression couplers, some people like the screw type tighteners. Linear Solutions sells these automatic ones that latch on. It's really cool. So here, once I actually had the 90-degree laid in where I needed it, and I had going to the EMT 22-degree offset, I had two of them, so I actually just offset the thing. I figured out how long the 2-inch EMT I needed to get it to, so what I had to cut it down to. Now, cutting 2-inch EMT is not easy, okay? Hacksaws, grinders, you know, whatever you have. I'm very fortunate. I had access where I could borrow a large bandsaw, and it made very quick work of this 2.5-inch EMT. And I bought an extra piece just in case I was a little off. Again, Linear Solutions helped me out with that. So again, can't recommend them enough. Just like any time you cut something, I wanted to spend a lot of time boring out this 2-inch EMT just to make sure there weren't any loose pieces of metal. And then there was basically ready to install. I had everything measured out. I had a little flexibility on the angles, but no flexibility on the distance. So I had to be really careful with how I went about measuring this. So I did take a number of extra steps in here that aren't shown in the videos, but I didn't just measure twice. I measured 6 or 7 times before I made the cut. And then I'll just attach it into this coupler here, and I won't tighten it down yet. I'm actually going to come back through once I know all of my hardware is going to fit where I need it. Then I'll come through and really tighten it down. Now, I may have snugged up a couple so they wouldn't get pulled out, but by no means was I going to actually crank down on the screw and get that tight. And now the last thing to do is to get this 90-degree bend put in there. And you can see here I got to pound it a little bit to get it in there. Pretty common. And then what I'll do is snug this up. Now I had to tighten this one up actually because it was going to be above that beam that's going across there. And so I could easily snug up one side, but I didn't want to snug up both, especially on this one because I couldn't come down straight at a 90-degree, even though it's a 90-degree bend, I had to, the angle compared to the wall was a little off because I had a heating duct right there that I had to avoid. So it's just offset a little bit, not a big deal. So I'm going to run this in here, and again, I had to be very careful with my measurements here and be very precise with how this was going to go because I didn't want to cut any of the 90-degree bend off. And honestly, it just sat in there perfectly. Just like anything, you got to put a little elbow grease into it, but eventually I got it lined up and it sat exactly where I needed it to go. Once I was really confident that everything was perfectly lined up, I went ahead and went through and attached this. Now, because this EMT is so big, I couldn't use a number 2 square head. It's actually a number 3, and I didn't have one. So they gave you the option to use a flathead screwdriver. So I used a really thick flathead screwdriver to really crank these down. And again, it was pretty awesome. Now I'm ready to start actually running the wire. So on my 90-degree bend right there, my LB, I went ahead and opened up the case, and I'm starting to shove the wire in here. You can see here, I'm trying to straighten the wire before I push it in there as much as possible. And I did tape the ends together. Running this size wire it's a lot of work. You can get a lubricant to use it. I was trying to be as cheap on this job as possible, and my run wasn't that long. So here I'm going to go ahead and remove the LB because it's just going to make running this into the new box when I'm getting ready to switch this out much easier. So I'm going to go ahead and push this through. I hit a little obstruction here, came in, yanked it through, not a big deal. Now, when I'm doing this, I wanted to make sure I had enough length, which I know I did. So I didn't want to cut anything. So I'm going to strip one side, get it attached, and then leave it there until I'm ready to put the new box in and it's ready to go. Now I'm ready to start connecting these up. And with this size wire, you got to really put some oomph into it and make sure you kind of know where you want this to go because these are really, really thick. And so my neutral goes right into here, okay? And so I need to come in, loosen this up. This will be the first one that I run. There's no specific rule or order to whichever one you're doing. You just gotta, make sure you get it in there right. You don't need too much there. You always gotta manhandle these a little bit more than I would prefer, but there we go. Now I left a lot down there in the bottom. Now, they do make strippers for these. Okay, they're about 60 bucks, and they do about 4 different size wire. And I don't cut thick wire like this all the time. I tend to just use a utility knife. I think it gives a really nice connection. Now, some people will freak out about this being here at the bottom. There's like a little bump up here, but this attaches to the side and this doesn't make contact up here. So that's okay. So you're okay there. A little bit deeper. Sometimes when that's not working, I'll get my Klein knife out. That's my everyday knife, so try not to get that avoid that from getting dull. All right. Very good. Very good. Now with the red and the black one, I want to make sure there's a good cut on this because this goes into here and it can actually make contact with this. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to make a really nice cut. Oh, all right. The black one's actually pretty good. So I think I'm going to leave that there as is. So you can't see it, but right here on the edge, it will show you how much you should strip off, okay? And you can measure that if you can't get the wire in there. So you're gonna measure this out. This is exactly 1 inch they want you to take off of here. So that makes it a little bit easier actually. So make sure you're following the line. You gotta be careful here because if you're not, what can happen is you end up going in circles around here, and that's not the best approach to this. And don't be afraid to switch out these utility knife blades, all right? The minute they start getting dull, get rid of them. Get rid of them. They're cheap, and they are meant to be disposable. Like the tip is already broken off of this one. No big deal. Come here. Perfect. So if you're doing this for yourself, you're going to save as much money as you can. Every foot of this stuff counts. Right now, this was running, I think, $4. $4 a pop. And so I was pretty specific when I went to measure this out. I have a couple extra feet, which is fine. But man, if you're every foot off, that's $12. A little bit more than that, because I wasn't even counting the green wire. All right, so I'm gonna run my ground into here. Now, I have to look and see, but I don't think there are torque specs for the ground, okay? So, but I'll just verify that at some point. Now we have to really bend this thing, okay? So this is where you never want to get into an arm wrestling competition with a electrician. Okay, So the important thing to do here is to make sure when you tighten this down, it does not get at all on the insulation. That is really, really important to make sure it's going to do. So again, I'll torque this down later, but I need to get these tight enough for right now. These wires are in, they're up there all the way. There's no insulation on these wires. Whew, gotta eat your Wheaties when you're doing this. So we'll go ahead. Again, I'm just gonna lightly tighten these. I'm not gonna tighten them up all the way. So what I'd like to do is once I get all these in here, once I get all this in here, then I'll come in with my torque wrench and I'll just tighten everything up at the same time. Just kind of makes things a little bit easier. And the torque ratings are typically right here. So we're talking 200 inch-pounds. So it shouldn't be too bad. All right, so that's this side. Again, I'll come in and torque all this later, but there's the first part. All right. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is figure out where the center of this is going up as high. Now I'm not going very high because we're sneaking under a tree here. So I'm really only going up maybe 7.5 feet. Plus this thing is already so far, this thing's already so far off the ground that I'm basically just gonna go up, but I gotta mark the center of where this is gonna go so I can get the brackets, the back straps properly set up. So there's nothing fancy I'm doing here. I'm just simply using a level going from the center of the hole, and I'll mark up from there. I found this to be the easiest and most accurate way to do this. All right, so now I'm gonna put one back strap on, fit it to make sure that it's good to go, and then I'll put the other one up there. All right, so basically I'm just leveling this off with the mark that I made with the larger level, and then I'm going to just pre-drill the stucco, and I'm going to use Tapcons to put the first bolt in on this one. That's because the stucco here is so thick and it will embed itself in the wood. Then I'll use a larger lag bolt later when I come in to go ahead and mount the back strap to the actual back plate, which I found works really well on these old houses. Okay, so I'm going to now piece together my pipe going up get a little bit of a twist. There we go. Tighten that in. All right, now I'm attaching the bottom part here, and there'll be 4 screws that will go into the box sealing it, but I like to attach it this way so I don't have to try to screw that on top of it. And I'm just using a pair of large plumb pliers and a pipe wrench that I had laying around to actually attach these. Now for the top part, I went ahead and I pre-attached the 90-degree bend on there because I purchased that because I didn't have the ability to actually bend it. I need to get this to the angle that I need it to be, and I'm fairly close actually. I need about 1/4 of a turn, and this thing should be perfect. Sorry about the dog barking in the background. I would say welcome to my life. Right there is perfect. Oh man, that could not have gone better actually. Yeah, I think that's going to be perfect. So it's time to put it up there and see how it goes. All right, so basically I set it up there and I saw that it lined up perfectly with the back strap. So I went ahead and used the 4 self-tapping screws to attach that bottom plate to the actual meter box itself. Now, I start off using a drill with this to actually drill it through, and then once I get close, I come in with an Allen wrench and I finish it off. And the reason I do that is I don't want to strip those screws. Also, side note, always make sure you know where those are located. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and put the cap on here, the beginning portions of this, so I kind of get an idea of how it's going to line up and everything. And again, I'm right at the correct angle that I wanted. I'm at a pretty good distance. I actually came back and added another about 8 inches to this later. I'm not sure if you can see that. It just wasn't in the previous portion of the video. So I actually added a little bit of distance to pull it away from the house just a bit more. And so I'm just attaching the weatherhead onto here before I begin to push any of the wires down there. The next thing to do is to go ahead and run the wires down to the meter box. You could try to push these up, but I always found it easier to go from the top down and let gravity help me out. Now notice here, I'm trying to straighten the wire out a little bit before I push it in there. This works a little bit better on more vertical runs, not horizontal runs like this, but I find that helps. It just it gives me the ability to apply pressure to the wire a little more consistently. Now, I don't want you to this is hard. Working with 3/0 wire is always going to be a little bit of a struggle. You're always going to have to put some oomph on here. And you can see I'm in a really awkward position here where I'm trying to apply force through my hand, but I'm at the very edge of the house, so I can't get my full body weight into it, and I'm relying a little bit more from energy from my just arms and shoulders. Eventually I got it down there though. I knew I would. I wasn't too concerned about it, and it worked out really well. Now you'll notice that I'm using 3 different color wires, one for the neutral, red, and black for the 2 hots. A lot of people will just run black wire and put white tape around there, but for the same cost, I thought it was totally fine. Now, once I actually I got stopped. I couldn't go any farther. I came through, and I wasn't going to mess with it. I just grabbed my plumb pliers, and I just yanked the wire out. Turned out. All right, so you can see here, now I have just I need to separate out the wires. I taped them before I actually ran them down there, just so I wouldn't lose one halfway through the process. Might not have been necessary, but I thought all in all, it makes it, I personally find it a little bit easier to have them pull through. Now I don't actually tie them off at the same. I always have a lead, and that's why you can see I was pulling them through. Now I'm just removing the bolts where they need to go. And so I'm just going to back these out so they're going to be easier to get in. Once you turn a little twist on it, you can open them up by hand, and it's just not that big of a... So I know I talked about how to do this earlier in the video or in another video, depending on how you're watching this. But basically what I'm doing here is stripping the 3/0 wire. In this case, I'm using my Klein electrician's knife. I find it works really well. This is my everyday knife. It's not as sharp as it used to be, but it still works pretty well here. And you can see I just go wrap around the whole thing one time, a couple times actually, and then from where I gouge the plastic, then I go ahead and pop it through, and I just strip it to the ends. Because I hurt my hand at the batting cages the night before, I'm using a couple cheats that I typically don't, but in this case I just used my lineman's pliers. It worked out really well. And so that might be a trick that I use from now on whenever I have lineman pliers hanging around. Then I'm going to force this neutral into its spot. Now, you really have to manhandle this wire to get it in there, but it is incredibly important that you do not get the insulation in the way. You want to make sure that the insulation is not going to be crimped down. That can really hurt the connection there. And again, before I mention this, I'm not going to torque these down to their ratings yet. I'm just going to go ahead, get everything wired up, and then I'll come back and torque everything. And I'm going to follow the same process for stripping out. You can see I went to my utility knife here, my box opener, if you will. And again, you can use either one. Just totally depends on what's closest and what's in hand. I will say you have to replace the blades on those quite a lot, and you cannot get any pressure coming from the sides or you'll break it. So it just kind of depends on best practice, whatever you feel is what you're most comfortable with. And again, you have to manhandle all 3 wires to get them into place, and then you want to lock them in so they're not moving around. So I tighten them up so they won't move, and then later on I'll come back and torque it down to these were, I think I remember right, 200 inch-pounds. All right, now this black one here, I wasn't happy with how the end looked, when they cut it at the distribution place, they it wasn't a clean cut, and so I just nipped off the top just to make it a little bit cleaner. Probably not super necessary, but it made me feel better. You know, if I was wiring up, it's a subdivision with 100 different houses, I'm not sure how particular I would be about something like that, but I try to be a professional. Right. And this thing is, the inside of this box is wired. It's getting dark out though. Whew. The next part is to actually finish up putting in the weatherhead. Now this can be a little bit tricky, and it takes a lot of force to get it in there, but there are some tricks you can do here. So the holes actually are in specific locations. So if you trace those back to where the wires are, it will slide up and into its holder a lot easier. Now once you get it in there, you're going to have to really bend this wire to get that plastic piece in place, and this can be a really big pain. And if anybody has any hints and tricks, let me know. Since I was working by myself, I just got so frustrated. I popped it up there, I put some tape around there, and then I used some zip ties to be able to actually crank that down and get the turn that I wanted. Now if I wasn't going at such an extreme angle here, coming right out of a 90-degree bend basically into another 90, this wouldn't have been nearly as hard. But in the end, I got it, so that made me feel really good actually, because this was a tricky one. And then I just come in with my flathead screwdriver, tighten it up, and hopefully that'll never have to be moved, especially when ComEd comes in to make the final connections. ComEd's my electrical company that services my area. Again, I had to move the ladder over to actually tighten this up. Again, every situation is going to be a little bit different when you're mounting an overhead surface. I personally find that keeping just your basic flathead screwdriver around for most electricians is still a really important thing. Now, I was going to have to run a temporary service here, and this is dangerous because you're going to have to cut the wires live. Now, I'm not going to show you that in any of the videos here because I felt really uncomfortable about kind of sending that out to the general public. But basically, I spent a little extra money to make this extra safe. So what I did was, you can see these black holsters right there, and basically this is a way you can make an electrical connection live that stays waterproof. And so basically I stripped them out, and then with an Allen wrench tightened them down, and you can see in the upper left hand corner, eventually when I'm ready, I will cut those and swing them over there for my temporary service until ComEd can come out there and get it fixed. The last thing I need to do here is just to put in the mount where the strap can go. Sometimes it's called a pin eye. There's a couple of different names for it out there that are used, but basically you can see the old one is white and it's underneath the vent. I'm putting a new one in here, and I'm just going to put in some really thick, I think I went with 3-inch lag bolts on this, and so because this is where all the weight of the wire will be attached to, and for the drip loop on there. And in the end, worked out pretty good. All right, now it's time to actually torque everything down. Now the top takes a socket, and you want to verify that the settings are correct on your torque wrench. Now these are typically given in inch-pounds, and the torque wrench that I have is in foot-pounds. So I just did the simple conversion, asked Google to verify it, very simple. And then I went ahead and torqued it down. Now again, the important thing when you're torquing these down is to make sure that it clicks twice. So you're gonna put force on until it clicks, and then you're going to go back and click and do it one more time and have it click twice. That's the way I've always done it. That's the way that I was trained. Now the bottom uses an Allen wrench, and in this case the Allen wrench size, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I didn't have that for my an adapter for my wrench, so I went ahead and had to cut an Allen wrench off and put it in an 8mm socket, and it worked out really well, and I got everything tightened up to the recommended torque setting. Okay, so this thing is all torqued and ready to go. So now I'm just going to pull the meter of the service to make sure that it will fit into this one. I'm sure it will. There's a couple important things to remember when you're pulling your meter out. First, if there's a lock on it, you may have to call your utility company and have them come and take it off. The second, and this is the most important thing, the top of the top brackets on the meter are very likely live unless you've already cut them, so you need to be extra careful there if it is live. So here I'm putting the meter in, give it a couple knocks on the head, make sure that it fits in there really well, and remember, the meter is actually just a switch. Okay, so when you pull it out, it kills power to the bottom, and when you put it in, it will supply power. Now, nothing's hooked up here, so once I pulled the meter, everything in the house was dead. So you want to know very specifically when you're setting up your project and planning it out, when is time to pull the meter, because once I pulled it, I had no more power coming into the house, and everything was dead until I switched the box out.